The FAIRS Act, it is getting enacted June 11, 2025, and it's going to radically change how people in New York City are going to be renting their apartments. It was actually passed about 6 months ago. Mayor Adams has not vetoed the bill. He did say that the small landlords will pay for this. However, there might be a little kicker, and that's to the end. So the FAIRS Act is the Fairness of Apartment Renting Expenses Act. Essentially, it says whoever hires the listing agent for rental pays the listing agent. So if you're a condo or co-op, you're a landlord, you're an owner, you're a property manager, you have a brownstone, a multifamily, you have a townhouse, it doesn't matter. If you hire a listing agent, you have to pay the listing agent. So none of this 15%, 10% of the year's rent paid by the incoming tenant. It's actually now going to be paid by the owner. However, if you are someone hiring a tenant's agent, in other words, you are a renter hiring someone to represent you going into the rental, you still have to work out the fee with them. If you're someone going direct to the listing agent, it's no fee. The interesting thing is that I went through the Dodd-Frank era where the banks were supposedly and obviously taking advantage of the consumers. So the Dodd-Frank came down to protect the consumers, and it hurt the bad banks. The banks were lending at 100% lending, and they were also giving 20% on top of that for construction costs. And they came out with the Dodd-Frank to make sure we take care of those consumers. However, the additional paperwork, regulation, and fees that were incurred by the banks after the Dodd-Frank got pushed down to the consumers. And if you look at all 50 states after the Dodd-Frank, the closing costs for the buyer skyrocketed, including some states that had over 1,000% increase. And you can look this up online from the Dodd-Frank to today and how extreme these closing costs are. So did it really hurt the consumer or protect the consumer? It kind of did both. It did get more expensive, but obviously the banks have more regulations and what they can actually lend on, usually 80% loan to value. With this case, a lot of owners are saying, listen, I have to pay the listing agent, bake this into the rental prices, which are already at crazy numbers right now. They're at records across Manhattan, let alone Brooklyn, which is breaking all neighborhood records right now. Personally, I haven't actually charged the tenant in probably 15 years because I just saw it as unfair. There was a huge regulation that got passed a couple of years ago that forced landlords at lease signing to only do 1 month of rent and 1 month of security when they were doing 6 months of rent, 6 months of security. In other words, making it unaffordable to actually rent in New York City. This was another barrier to a lot of people where you would pay the 1 month rent, 1 month security, plus the 15, 10% or 1 month broker fee, whatever it was. So it's good. However, when I'm talking to landlords, the number one thing they always say is you could either put it up at $2,600 and the incoming tenant pays the fee, or you put it at $2,800 and I'll pay your fee. In other words, they're baking the fee into the rental price. I'd love to know in the comments below what you think is going to happen. Is it going to get pushed to the consumers? Especially the average amount of time spent in a rental apartment is about 3 to 4 years. So I know it's a lot up front, but over the long term, in other words, 4 years, that $200 times 12 months times 4 years, what do you think? Would you rather pay it at higher rents or up front? Leave it in the comments below. Subscribe for more. We're going to be coming out with a lot of videos on new regulations, new laws, whether it's nationally or locally in Manhattan and New York City. I'll talk to you guys soon.